The grandfather clock in the foyer of Brent House struck midnight on October 31, 1886, its bronze chimes echoing through corridors that had grown unnaturally cold. Upstairs, in the master bedroom, Cornelius Brent should have been sleeping peacefully beside his wife of 23 years. Instead, the mahogany four-poster bed lay empty, its silk sheets still warm but bearing no trace of the man who had retired there just hours before. What made his disappearance truly terrifying wasn't just that he had vanished without a trace from a locked room on the second floor of his Garden District mansion. It wasn't even the fact that the windows remained sealed from the inside, their heavy brass latches undisturbed. No, what sent chills through the spine of everyone who heard the story was what the servants found in his place, a perfect outline of ash on the mattress, shaped exactly like a human body, and beside it, a single black rose that crumbled to dust the moment anyone tried to touch it. But Cornelius Brent wasn't the first to disappear from that cursed mansion on Prytania Street. He was merely the latest victim in a pattern of vanishings that had plagued the house since its construction 15 years earlier, disappearances so bizarre and inexplicable that they defied every attempt at rational explanation. Welcome back to Bayou Nightmares, where the impossible becomes inevitable and the shadows hold secrets that daylight cannot dispel. Tonight, we're stepping into one of New Orleans' most haunted neighborhoods to uncover a mystery that has baffled investigators for over a century. From the opulent mansions of the Garden District to the dark forces that seem to hunger for human souls, we'll explore the macabre disappearance at Brent House and the sinister pattern that suggests something far more terrifying than mere murder. Before we cross the threshold into this realm where people vanish into thin air and reality itself seems to unravel, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss our next journey into the unexplained. Now, let's walk these haunted streets together, where every shadow might be a doorway to oblivion. The story of Brent House begins in 1871, when railroad magnate Thaddeus Blackwood commissioned the construction of what would become one of the Garden District's most magnificent and most cursed residences. Blackwood had made his fortune connecting the remote parishes of Louisiana to the bustling port of New Orleans, but his wealth came with a price that wouldn't become apparent until it was far too late. The mansion itself was a masterpiece of Victorian Gothic architecture, designed by the renowned architect James Gallier Jr. 3 stories of pristine white columns and intricate ironwork rose from manicured gardens, while inside, imported marble and crystal chandeliers created an atmosphere of refined elegance. But from the very beginning, there were signs that something was fundamentally wrong with the house. Construction workers reported tools disappearing overnight, only to be found days later in impossible locations, hammers discovered inside sealed walls, saws found buried in the garden with no explanation for how they got there. More disturbing were the accidents that plagued the building process. 7 workers died during construction, an unusually high number for a project of this scale, and each death was stranger than the last. The first victim, a carpenter named Henri Thibodeau, was found at the bottom of a stairwell that hadn't existed the day before. The second, a painter called Marcus Webb, simply vanished while working alone in what would become the library. His brushes were found still wet with paint, his ladder still standing, but Marcus himself was never seen again. When the police investigated, they discovered something that chilled them to the bone, wet footprints leading from Marcus's work area to a solid brick wall, where they simply stopped. Despite these ominous signs, Thaddeus Blackwood pressed forward with the construction, driven by an obsession that his friends and family found increasingly disturbing. He spoke of the house as if it were alive, referring to it as she and claiming that it called to him in his dreams. His wife, Eleanor, begged him to abandon the project, but Thaddeus refused to listen. When Brent House was finally completed in the spring of 1872, the Blackwood family moved in with great fanfare. The housewarming party was the social event of the season, attended by New Orleans elite and featuring an orchestra, elaborate decorations, and enough champagne to float a riverboat. But the celebration was short-lived. 3 weeks after moving in, Thaddeus Blackwood disappeared. Eleanor found his study empty one morning, his breakfast still warm on the desk, his fountain pen lying uncapped beside an unfinished letter. The study's door had been locked from the inside, and the windows were sealed shut with their original factory putty. There was no way in or out except through the door that Eleanor herself had unlocked. But what truly terrified the investigators was what they found in Thaddeus's chair, another perfect outline of ash, this one still faintly warm to the touch. Beside it lay a single black orchid, its petals so dark they seemed to absorb light itself. When the police captain reached for the flower, it disintegrated instantly, leaving behind only a sweet, cloying scent that made everyone in the room feel nauseous. The disappearance of Thaddeus Blackwood sent shockwaves through New Orleans society. The police launched an extensive investigation, interviewing servants, searching the house from top to bottom, and even bringing in bloodhounds to track any possible scent trail. They found nothing. It was as if Thaddeus had simply ceased to exist. Eleanor Blackwood, devastated by her husband's disappearance and terrified of the house that had claimed him, put the mansion up for sale immediately. Despite its grandeur and prime location, the house sat empty for nearly 2 years. Potential buyers would tour the property, express interest, but inevitably change their minds after spending time inside. Many reported feeling watched, hearing whispers in empty rooms, and experiencing an overwhelming sense of dread that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. Finally, in 1874, the house was purchased by cotton merchant Reginald Ashford, who got it for a fraction of its actual value. Ashford was a practical man who dismissed the stories about the house as superstitious nonsense. He moved in with his wife, Margaret, and their 2 teenage children, confident that his rational worldview would protect him from whatever had supposedly claimed Thaddeus Blackwood. For 6 months, the Ashford family lived peacefully in the mansion. Reginald's business prospered, Margaret became a prominent figure in Garden District society, and their children thrived in their new environment. It seemed as though the curse, if it had ever existed, had been broken. Then came the night of November 13, 1874. Margaret Ashford was awakened by the sound of her husband's voice coming from downstairs. He seemed to be having a conversation with someone, though she couldn't make out the words or identify the other voice. Assuming he was conducting late-night business, she tried to go back to sleep. But something about the tone of the conversation troubled her. There was an urgency, almost a desperation in Reginald's voice that she had never heard before. When she went downstairs to investigate, she found the parlor empty. Reginald's brandy snifter sat on the side table, still half full and warm to the touch. His pipe lay in the ashtray, tobacco still smoldering. But Reginald himself was nowhere to be found. Margaret searched the entire house, calling his name, checking every room, every closet, every possible hiding place. The front door was locked and chained from the inside. The back door was similarly secured. All the windows were latched tight. There was simply no way for Reginald to have left the house. But in the parlor, where Margaret had heard his voice just minutes before, she found the now familiar sign, a perfect outline of ash on the Persian rug where Reginald had been sitting, and beside his chair, a single black lily that turned to powder when she tried to pick it up. The pattern was becoming clear, and it was more terrifying than anyone wanted to admit. The house wasn't just haunted, it was hungry. It seemed to feed on the people who lived within its walls, consuming them completely and leaving behind only ash and mysterious black flowers as evidence of their existence. Margaret Ashford fled the house that very night, taking her children and never returning. She sold the property through intermediaries, refusing to set foot on the grounds again. In interviews with local newspapers, she claimed that the house was a doorway to somewhere else, and that whatever lived within its walls was not of this world. The mansion sat empty for another year before being purchased by the Brent family in 1875. Cornelius Brent was a successful shipping merchant who had heard the stories about the house but dismissed them as elaborate hoaxes designed to drive down the property value. He was convinced that the previous disappearances had rational explanations, secret passages, hidden rooms, or elaborate schemes by the victims themselves to escape debts or scandals. Cornelius hired architects and engineers to thoroughly examine the house, searching for any hidden mechanisms or concealed spaces that might explain the mysterious vanishings. They found nothing. The house was exactly what it appeared to be, a well-built Victorian mansion with no secret passages, no hidden rooms, and no structural anomalies that could account for people simply vanishing into thin air. Satisfied that he had solved the mystery through rational investigation, Cornelius moved into Brent House with his wife, Vivian, and their 3 children. For 11 years, the family lived happily in the mansion. Cornelius's shipping business flourished, Vivian became known for her elaborate dinner parties, and their children grew up surrounded by luxury and privilege. But the house was patient. It waited, watching, biding its time like a spider in its web. The first sign that something was wrong came in the summer of 1886, when the Brents' eldest son, Thomas, began experiencing what he described as walking dreams. He would find himself in parts of the house with no memory of how he had gotten there, often in the middle of the night, sometimes in rooms that had been locked. During these episodes, Thomas claimed to hear voices calling to him from within the walls, speaking in languages he didn't recognize but somehow understood. Vivian Brent initially dismissed her son's experiences as the product of an overactive imagination, but she became concerned when Thomas began drawing elaborate symbols and diagrams that he claimed the voices had taught him. The symbols were unlike anything in any known language or writing system, yet they seemed to follow some internal logic that made them disturbingly compelling to look at. Dr. Edmond Rousseau, the family physician, examined Thomas and found him to be in perfect physical health. However, Dr. Rousseau noted in his private journal that the boy seemed to be listening to something that no one else could hear, and that his eyes had taken on a distant, otherworldly quality that was deeply unsettling. As autumn approached, Thomas's episodes became more frequent and more intense. He would disappear for hours at a time, only to be found standing motionless in various parts of the house, staring at blank walls as if watching some invisible drama unfold. When questioned about these incidents, Thomas would claim that he had been learning from the voices, though he could never explain what they were teaching him. The situation reached a crisis point on October 15, 1886, when Thomas vanished entirely for 3 days. The family searched everywhere, enlisted the help of neighbors and police, and even hired private investigators to scour the city. Thomas was found on the 3rd day, sitting calmly in the library as if nothing had happened. He had no memory of where he had been or what he had been doing, but he carried with him a leather-bound journal filled with more of the strange symbols, along with what appeared to be detailed architectural drawings of parts of the house that didn't exist. Cornelius Brent, a practical man like his predecessors, decided that his son needed professional help. He made arrangements to send Thomas to a private sanitarium in Virginia, where specialists could examine his condition more thoroughly. The departure was scheduled for November 1, 1886. Thomas never made it to Virginia. On the night of October 31, 1886, the same night that Cornelius himself would disappear, Thomas Brent vanished from his locked bedroom on the 3rd floor of the mansion. His parents found the room empty except for the now familiar outline of ash on the bed and a single black dahlia that dissolved at the slightest touch. But Thomas's disappearance was different from the others in one crucial way: he left behind a message. Written on the wall in what appeared to be charcoal, but in letters that seemed to shift and move when viewed directly, was a single sentence in perfect English: "The house remembers everything." Cornelius Brent was devastated by his son's disappearance, but he refused to abandon his home or his rational worldview. He hired more investigators, consulted with experts in unexplained phenomena, and even brought in a team of spiritualists to conduct seances in the house. Nothing provided any answers or brought his son back. As the days passed, Cornelius became increasingly obsessed with solving the mystery of the disappearances. He spent hours in his study, poring over architectural plans, historical records, and accounts of similar phenomena from around the world. His wife and remaining children begged him to leave the house, but Cornelius was determined to find a logical explanation for what had happened to his son. It was during this period of intense investigation that Cornelius began to experience his own encounters with the supernatural forces that inhabited the mansion. He reported hearing footsteps in empty rooms, finding doors that had been locked standing open, and discovering objects that had been moved from their usual places. Most disturbing of all, he claimed to hear Thomas's voice calling to him from within the walls, pleading for help in a tone that suggested unimaginable suffering. Vivian Brent later told investigators that her husband had become a man possessed in the weeks following Thomas's disappearance. He would work through the night in his study, emerging only for meals, his eyes red with exhaustion and his hands stained with ink from his frantic note-taking. He spoke constantly of patterns and connections that he claimed to be discovering, but when pressed for details, he would become evasive and paranoid. On October 30, 1886, exactly 1 year after Thomas's disappearance, Cornelius made a breakthrough that he believed would finally solve the mystery. He burst into the dining room where his family was having dinner, his face flushed with excitement, clutching a thick folder of documents and drawings. "I found it," he announced breathlessly. "I know what this house really is, and I know how to get Thomas back." But when Vivian asked him to explain his discovery, Cornelius suddenly became secretive. He claimed that the knowledge was too dangerous to share and that he needed to prepare properly before attempting to rescue their son. He spent the rest of the evening locked in his study, and when Vivian tried to check on him before retiring for the night, she found the door barred from the inside. The next morning, Halloween 1886, Cornelius was gone. The investigation into Cornelius Brent's disappearance was the most thorough ever conducted into the mysterious vanishings at the mansion. Detective Inspector Claude Thibodeau of the New Orleans Police Department personally oversaw the case, bringing in experts from as far away as Boston and Chicago to examine the scene. What they found defied all rational explanation. Cornelius's study was exactly as he had left it the night before, with one exception: every document, every book, every piece of paper in the room had been reduced to ash. The desk, the chairs, the bookshelves, everything was covered in a fine gray powder that had once been paper and ink. Yet nothing else in the room showed any sign of fire damage. The wooden furniture was untouched, the curtains were intact, and there was no smell of smoke or burning. In the center of the room, where Cornelius's desk chair had been, was the largest ash outline yet discovered, not just the shape of a human body, but what appeared to be the impression of someone sitting at a desk, leaning forward as if writing. Beside this outline was not one black flower, but an entire bouquet of black roses, each one turning to dust as soon as it was exposed to air. But the most disturbing discovery was found when investigators examined the ash more closely. Mixed in with the remains of the burned documents were fragments of what appeared to be human bone, tiny pieces of skull, vertebrae, and finger bones that had been reduced to powder but were still recognizable under magnification. Dr. Alphonse Moreau, the coroner who examined these remains, concluded that they belonged to at least 3 different individuals, all of whom had been subjected to intense heat that exceeded anything achievable through normal combustion. The implications were horrifying. The house wasn't just making people disappear, it was consuming them entirely, body and soul. The Brent family fled the mansion immediately after Cornelius's disappearance, leaving behind all their possessions and never returning. Vivian Brent gave a single interview to the Times-Picayune before disappearing from public life entirely, moving to Europe with her surviving children and refusing to speak about her experiences ever again. In that interview, published on November 15, 1886, Vivian made a statement that would haunt everyone who read it. "The house is not haunted," she said. "The house is alive. It feeds on human souls, and it will never stop being hungry. We were not its victims, we were its food." After the Brent family's departure, the mansion sat empty for over a decade. The property was seized by the city for unpaid taxes and put up for auction multiple times, but no buyers came forward. Local residents began to avoid the entire block, claiming that the house exerted a malevolent influence that extended beyond its walls. Children reported seeing faces in the windows of the empty mansion, even though the building had been boarded up and sealed. Adults complained of nightmares that began whenever they walked past the property. Even animals seemed to sense something wrong with the house. Dogs would refuse to walk on the same side of the street, and birds would not nest in the trees surrounding the property. In 1897, the city of New Orleans decided to demolish the mansion and sell the land for redevelopment. But the demolition crew encountered problems that defied explanation. Tools would disappear overnight, only to be found inside the sealed house the next morning. Workers reported feeling watched and hearing voices calling to them from within the walls. Most disturbing of all, several crew members claimed to see the ghostly figures of previous residents wandering through the rooms, beckoning them to come inside. The demolition was abandoned after 3 workers disappeared in a single week. Unlike the previous vanishings, these men didn't leave behind ash outlines or mysterious flowers. They simply walked into the house during their lunch break and never came out. When their colleagues went to look for them, they found the building empty except for the workers' tools, which had been arranged in the basement in patterns that matched the strange symbols Thomas Brent had drawn in his journal. Faced with a situation that seemed to defy all rational solutions, the city decided to leave the mansion standing but declared it permanently condemned. The building was surrounded by a high iron fence, and warning signs were posted to keep the curious away. For the next several decades, Brent House stood as a monument to the inexplicable, a reminder that some mysteries are too dangerous to solve. But the house's hunger was not satisfied by isolation. Throughout the early 20th century, people continued to disappear in the vicinity of the mansion. Homeless individuals seeking shelter, curious teenagers daring each other to approach the fence, even police officers conducting routine patrols, all vanished without a trace. The disappearances followed the same pattern: people would be seen approaching the property, but they would never be seen leaving. In 1923, paranormal investigator Dr. Helena Blackthorne led an expedition to study the mansion using the latest scientific equipment. Her team included photographers, recording specialists, and instruments designed to detect electromagnetic anomalies. They set up their equipment outside the fence and began monitoring the property around the clock. What they recorded over the course of a week changed the scientific understanding of haunted locations forever. The photographs showed figures moving through the empty rooms of the mansion, not just the ghostly outlines typical of spirit photography, but clear, detailed images of people in period dress going about their daily activities as if they were still alive. The recordings captured voices, footsteps, and even entire conversations taking place inside the supposedly empty building. But most remarkable of all were the electromagnetic readings. The instruments detected energy patterns that suggested the presence of multiple consciousness existing simultaneously within the same space. Dr. Blackthorne theorized that the house had somehow become a repository for the souls of everyone who had disappeared within its walls, trapping them in a kind of spiritual limbo where they continued to exist but could never escape. The expedition ended abruptly when Dr. Blackthorne herself vanished on the final night of the investigation. Her team found her equipment still running, her notes still open on her desk, but Helena herself was gone. Unlike the previous disappearances, however, her vanishing was captured on film. The footage, which still exists in the archives of the Society for Psychical Research, shows Dr. Blackthorne working at her desk when she suddenly looks up, as if hearing something. She stands, walks toward the fence surrounding the mansion, and passes through the iron bars as if they were made of mist. The camera follows her as she approaches the front door of the house, which opens by itself to admit her. She disappears inside, and the door closes behind her. What makes the footage truly disturbing is what happens next. For several minutes, nothing occurs. Then, slowly, the windows of the mansion begin to glow with a soft, golden light. Figures can be seen moving past the windows, dozens of them, all dressed in clothing from different eras. And among them, clearly visible in one of the upper windows, is Dr. Helena Blackthorne, looking out at the camera with an expression of profound sadness before fading from view. The implications of this footage were staggering. It suggested that the people who had disappeared into Brent House weren't dead in any conventional sense, they were trapped, existing in some kind of parallel dimension that overlapped with our own. The house had become a prison for souls, a place where the boundary between life and death had been permanently shattered. Word of Dr. Blackthorne's expedition and its disturbing results spread throughout the international paranormal community. Researchers from around the world came to New Orleans to study the mansion, but none were allowed to enter the property. The city had learned its lesson and refused to permit any further investigations that might result in more disappearances. However, this didn't stop people from trying to solve the mystery on their own. Throughout the 1930s and 1940s, amateur ghost hunters, occult practitioners, and curiosity seekers regularly attempted to breach the fence and enter the mansion. Most were caught by police and arrested for trespassing. But some succeeded in reaching the house, and they were never seen again. By the 1950s, the area around Brent House had become known as the Dead Zone, a section of the Garden District that locals avoided after dark. Property values in the surrounding blocks plummeted, and several neighboring mansions were abandoned as their owners fled what they perceived as a spreading supernatural contamination. The situation reached a crisis point in 1963, when a group of civil rights activists chose the empty lot across from Brent House as the site for a peaceful demonstration. The protest was intended to draw attention to housing discrimination in the Garden District, but it ended in tragedy when 5 of the demonstrators simply vanished during the night. Security cameras set up by the police to monitor the protest captured the disappearances, and the footage revealed a pattern that was both familiar and terrifying. Each of the missing activists was shown walking toward the mansion in the middle of the night, their movements slow and dreamlike, as if they were sleepwalking. They passed through the fence just as Dr. Blackthorne had done decades earlier, entered the house through doors that opened by themselves, and were never seen again. The civil rights community was outraged, demanding answers and justice for the missing activists. But the police investigation revealed nothing that could be used in court. There was no evidence of foul play, no signs of struggle, and no rational explanation for how 5 people could simply walk through solid iron bars and disappear into a building that had been sealed for decades. The incident prompted the federal government to take an interest in Brent House for the first time. A team of investigators from the FBI's newly formed Paranormal Phenomena Division arrived in New Orleans in 1964 to conduct a classified study of the mansion and its effects on the surrounding area. The FBI report, which was declassified in 1994 under the Freedom of Information Act, makes for disturbing reading. The investigators concluded that Brent House represented an ongoing threat to public safety and recommended that the building be contained using any means necessary. The report also suggested that the phenomenon was not limited to the mansion itself but was slowly spreading outward, affecting an ever-widening area around the original property. Based on these recommendations, the federal government implemented a containment protocol that remains in effect to this day. The mansion and the surrounding block were declared a special administrative zone and placed under the jurisdiction of a classified government agency. The area was surrounded by a new, higher fence equipped with electronic surveillance, and armed guards were posted to prevent unauthorized access. Official records state that these measures were taken to protect a sensitive archaeological site, but local residents knew the truth. The government was trying to contain something that couldn't be contained, a supernatural force that had already claimed dozens of lives and showed no signs of weakening. Despite the increased security, people continued to disappear in the vicinity of Brent House throughout the 1970s and 1980s. The vanishings followed the same pattern. Individuals would be seen approaching the fence, often in a trance-like state, and would somehow bypass the security measures to enter the property. Guards reported that their electronic equipment would malfunction whenever someone was in the process of disappearing, and by the time the systems came back online, the person would be gone. The most well-documented case from this period involved Dr. Marcus Webb, a psychiatrist who had been studying the psychological effects of the mansion on local residents. Dr. Webb had theorized that the house exerted some kind of psychic influence that could compel people to approach it against their will. He had been working with several individuals who claimed to feel drawn to the property, trying to understand the mechanism behind this compulsion. On the night of October 31, 1979, exactly 93 years after Cornelius Brent's disappearance, Dr. Webb was conducting a late-night session with one of his patients in his office several blocks away from the mansion. Security footage from his building shows both Dr. Webb and his patient leaving the office at 11:47 p.m., walking in perfect synchronization toward Brent House. The government's surveillance cameras captured their approach to the fence. Both individuals moved with the same dreamlike gait that had characterized previous disappearances, their faces blank and their eyes fixed on the mansion. They reached the fence at exactly midnight and passed through it as if it were made of air. The electronic security systems registered no breach, the motion detectors showed no movement, and the guards on duty reported seeing nothing unusual. Dr. Webb and his patient entered the mansion through the front door, which opened to admit them and then closed behind them. For the next several hours, the surveillance cameras showed lights moving through the windows of the house, and sensitive audio equipment picked up the sounds of voices, footsteps, and what appeared to be some kind of ceremony or ritual taking place inside. At dawn, the activity ceased, and the mansion returned to its usual state of apparent emptiness. Webb and his patient were never seen again, but their disappearance provided researchers with the most detailed documentation yet of how the house claimed its victims. Analysis of the surveillance footage revealed several disturbing details. First, both Dr. Webb and his patient showed signs of being in an altered state of consciousness from the moment they left his office. Their pupils were dilated, their breathing was shallow, and their movements were perfectly synchronized, suggesting that they were under some kind of external control. Second, the electronic systems around the mansion showed specific patterns of interference that corresponded exactly to the approach and entry of the two men. The interference wasn't random, it followed a complex mathematical sequence that seemed designed to create blind spots in the surveillance network at precisely the right moments. Most disturbing of all, analysis of the audio recordings from inside the mansion revealed that Dr. Webb and his patient weren't alone. The voices captured by the equipment included not only their own, but also the voices of dozens of other individuals, all speaking in perfect unison. Voice analysis confirmed that these were the voices of people who had disappeared into the house over the previous century, including Cornelius Brent, Thomas Brent, and Dr. Helena Blackthorne. The implications were clear: everyone who had vanished into Brent House was still there, trapped in some kind of collective consciousness that existed within the walls of the mansion. They weren't dead, but they weren't truly alive either. They had become part of something larger and more terrifying than individual human existence. This revelation prompted a new phase of government research into the Brent House phenomenon. Scientists from various disciplines were brought in to study the mansion from a safe distance, using remote sensing equipment and advanced imaging technology to peer inside the building without risking human lives. What they discovered challenged everything they thought they knew about the nature of reality itself. Ground-penetrating radar revealed that the interior of the mansion was far larger than its exterior dimensions should have allowed. The building appeared to contain dozens of rooms that didn't exist on the original architectural plans, arranged in patterns that defied the laws of physics. Some rooms seemed to overlap with others in the same space, while others appeared to extend far underground, creating a vast subterranean complex beneath the modest basement shown in the building's blueprints. Thermal imaging showed heat signatures moving through these impossible spaces, not the random patterns of air circulation, but organized movement that suggested the presence of numerous individuals going about their daily activities. The heat signatures corresponded to human body temperature and moved in ways that indicated purposeful behavior, walking, sitting, gathering in groups, and performing what appeared to be coordinated activities. Perhaps most remarkably, temporal analysis of the imaging data revealed that the activities inside the mansion weren't occurring in linear time. Events from different eras seemed to be happening simultaneously, with heat signatures wearing clothing from various historical periods interacting with each other as if they all existed in the same moment. Dr. Sarah Chen, the lead physicist on the government research team, theorized that Brent House had somehow become unstuck from normal spacetime. It's as if the building exists in a pocket dimension where the usual rules don't apply, she wrote in her classified report. Past, present, and future seem to coexist within its walls, and the people who disappear into it become part of this temporal anomaly. The research also revealed that the phenomenon was indeed spreading, just as the FBI had feared decades earlier. The spatial distortions detected inside the mansion were beginning to affect the surrounding area, creating pockets of instability where the laws of physics became unreliable. Cars would occasionally be found abandoned in the middle of the street with their engines still running, their drivers having simply vanished. Buildings would develop rooms that weren't there the day before, and residents would report getting lost in their own homes as familiar hallways led to unfamiliar destinations. By the 1990s, the government was forced to expand the containment zone around Brent House, evacuating several city blocks and relocating hundreds of residents. The official explanation was a gas leak emergency, but the real reason was that the supernatural influence of the mansion was becoming too dangerous to ignore. The evacuation revealed the full extent of the phenomenon spread. In houses throughout the affected area, investigators found evidence of temporal displacement, furniture from different eras mixed together in single rooms, family photographs that showed people who had lived in the houses decades apart standing together as if they were contemporaries, and personal belongings that belonged to residents who had lived and died long before the current occupants were born. Most disturbing of all were the journals and diaries found in many of the evacuated homes. These documents, written by residents over the course of several decades, described a gradual blurring of time and memory. People wrote about having conversations with family members who had been dead for years, attending parties with guests from different historical periods, and experiencing days that seemed to repeat themselves or occur out of sequence. One particularly chilling diary entry, written by Margaret Fontaine in 1987, described her experience. "I had lunch with my grandmother today, which is impossible because she died when I was 7 years old. But there she was, sitting at my kitchen table, looking exactly as I remember her from old photographs. We talked about my childhood, and she gave me advice about my marriage troubles. When I asked her how she could be there, she just smiled and said, 'Time works differently here now, dear. The house has taught us that yesterday and tomorrow are just words.' When I looked away for a moment, she was gone, but her teacup was still warm." The government's response to these revelations was swift and decisive. The entire affected area was declared a national security zone and placed under military control. The official cover story was that the area had been contaminated by a chemical spill, but the real purpose was to prevent the temporal anomaly from spreading further into the city. A team of theoretical physicists and paranormal researchers was assembled to study the phenomenon and develop a solution. Led by Dr. Jonathan Blackwood, a descendant of the mansion's original owner, Thaddeus Blackwood, the team spent years trying to understand the mechanism behind the house's supernatural properties. Dr. Blackwood's research revealed a disturbing family secret that had been hidden for over a century. Thaddeus Blackwood hadn't simply been a railroad magnate with an interest in architecture, he had been a practitioner of the occult, specifically interested in what he called temporal manipulation. His private papers, discovered in a safety deposit box in 1995, revealed that he had deliberately designed Brent House to serve as a kind of supernatural machine, a device for breaking down the barriers between past, present, and future. According to Thaddeus's journals, he had been inspired by ancient texts that described methods for achieving immortality through the manipulation of time itself. He believed that by creating a space where linear time didn't exist, he could preserve himself and his family forever, existing in an eternal present that would never end. The construction of Brent House had been guided by these occult principles. The building's architecture incorporated sacred geometry, astronomical alignments, and hidden symbols designed to focus and amplify supernatural energies. The 7 workers who had died during construction hadn't been victims of accidents, they had been deliberate sacrifices, their life force used to power the temporal mechanism that Thaddeus was trying to create. But something had gone wrong with Thaddeus's plan. Instead of creating a paradise where time stood still, he had created a prison where souls became trapped in an endless cycle of existence. The house had become a supernatural predator, feeding on the life force of anyone who entered its domain and adding them to its collection of temporal prisoners. Dr. Blackwood's research team developed several theories about how to neutralize the mansion's supernatural properties, but all of them involved significant risks. The most promising approach was to use controlled explosions to disrupt the building's sacred geometry, breaking the occult patterns that gave it power. However, computer models suggested that destroying the house might release all of the trapped souls at once, creating a massive temporal shockwave that could affect the entire city. Alternative approaches included attempting to communicate with the trapped souls and convince them to voluntarily leave the house, or using advanced technology to create a temporal anchor that would force the building back into normal spacetime. But all of these methods required someone to enter the mansion, and everyone who had tried to do so had become part of the phenomenon they were trying to study. As the 21st century began, Brent House remained an unsolved mystery and an ongoing threat. The government continued to maintain its containment zone around the property, but the temporal anomalies showed no signs of weakening. If anything, they seemed to be growing stronger, as if the house was feeding on the attention and fear it generated. Modern technology has provided new insights into the phenomenon, but also new reasons for concern. Satellite imagery shows that the mansion appears different depending on when the photographs are taken, sometimes showing the building as it appeared in the 19th century, other times revealing architectural features that don't match any known historical records. Digital cameras malfunction when pointed at the house, producing images that show multiple exposures of the same building from different time periods superimposed on each other. Cell phone signals are disrupted in the area around the mansion, and GPS devices give conflicting readings about the location of streets and buildings. Some visitors to the containment zone report receiving text messages and phone calls from numbers that belong to people who disappeared into the house decades earlier, though the messages are usually incomprehensible fragments of words and symbols. Social media has brought new attention to the Brent house mystery, with urban explorers and paranormal enthusiasts constantly attempting to breach the government's security perimeter. Most are caught and detained before they can reach the mansion, but some succeed in getting close enough to take photographs and videos that they post online. These images and recordings show a building that seems to exist in a constant state of flux. Windows appear and disappear, architectural details shift and change, and shadowy figures can be seen moving through rooms that should be empty. The most disturbing footage shows the front door of the mansion opening and closing by itself, as if the house is breathing. Analysis of these amateur recordings has revealed patterns that suggest the house's supernatural activity follows certain cycles. The phenomena are strongest during the anniversary dates of the original disappearances, particularly October 31st, when Cornelius and Thomas Brent vanished. During these peak periods, the temporal distortions around the mansion become so intense that even the government's advanced monitoring equipment fails to function properly. Recent developments have added new urgency to the government's efforts to understand and contain the Brent house phenomenon. In 2019, seismic monitors detected unusual activity beneath the mansion, suggesting that the temporal anomalies were beginning to affect the geological structure of the area. Ground-penetrating radar revealed that the impossible underground complex beneath the house was continuing to expand, creating a vast network of chambers and tunnels that extended far beyond the original property boundaries. More alarming still, the temporal effects seem to be evolving. Instead of simply trapping people who entered the house, the mansion was beginning to reach out into the surrounding area, pulling individuals toward it from greater and greater distances. Security cameras throughout the Garden District began recording instances of people suddenly stopping whatever they were doing and walking in perfect synchronization toward the containment zone, their faces blank and their movements mechanical. Most of these individuals were intercepted by security forces before they could reach the mansion, but the incidents were becoming more frequent and involving larger groups of people. The government's worst fear was that the house might eventually be able to exert its influence over the entire city, turning New Orleans into a massive supernatural trap where millions of people could disappear into the temporal anomaly. In response to these developments, a new research initiative was launched in 2020, combining cutting-edge quantum physics with traditional occult knowledge in an attempt to finally solve the Brent house mystery. The team, led by Dr. Elena Vasquez, has made several breakthrough discoveries about the nature of the phenomenon. Using quantum field detectors, DR. Vasquez's team has determined that the mansion exists in a state of temporal superposition, where multiple versions of the building from different time periods occupy the same space simultaneously. This explains why the house appears to change its architecture and why people from different eras can interact with each other within its walls. The research has also revealed that the trapped souls aren't passive victims, they have become part of a collective consciousness that actively works to draw new people into the house. This consciousness has grown more sophisticated over time, learning to manipulate technology and human psychology to expand its influence. Perhaps most importantly, the team has discovered that the phenomenon isn't unique to Brent House. Similar temporal anomalies exist at other locations around the world, all connected by what appears to be a network of supernatural energy that spans the globe. Brent House may be just one node in a vast occult system that was created by practitioners like Thaddeus Blackwood over the course of centuries. This revelation has prompted an international effort to locate and study other sites in the network, with the ultimate goal of understanding the system as a whole and finding a way to shut it down permanently. However, This research is complicated by the fact that many of the other sites are located in populated areas where the supernatural phenomena have been successfully hidden from public knowledge. As of 2024, Brent House remains active and dangerous, its temporal anomalies continuing to grow stronger with each passing year. The government's containment efforts have prevented the phenomenon from spreading into the wider city, but they haven't been able to neutralize the threat entirely. The mansion continues to claim new victims, and the collective consciousness within its walls grows more powerful with each soul it adds to its collection. The house stands as a testament to the dangers of tampering with forces beyond human understanding. Thaddeus Blackwood's attempt to achieve immortality through occult means created something far worse than death, a prison where souls are trapped forever, existing in an endless cycle of temporal displacement that offers no hope of escape or peace. Local residents continue to report strange phenomena in the areas surrounding the containment zone, clocks that run backward, mirrors that show reflections from different time periods, and dreams that seem to be shared by multiple people simultaneously. These effects serve as a constant reminder that the influence of Brent House extends far beyond its physical walls, touching the lives of anyone who lives in its shadow. The mystery of the macabre disappearances at Brent House remains unsolved, but the ongoing research continues to reveal new aspects of the phenomenon. Each discovery brings scientists closer to understanding the true nature of the temporal anomaly, but also reveals new layers of complexity that make a solution seem increasingly elusive. What is certain is that Brent House represents one of the most significant supernatural phenomena ever documented, a place where the boundaries between life and death, past and present, have been permanently shattered. The mansion serves as a window into realms of existence that human science is only beginning to comprehend, and a warning about the consequences of seeking power over the fundamental forces of reality. As night falls over the Garden District and the shadows lengthen between the grand mansions of New Orleans' elite, Brent House continues its eternal vigil. Behind its sealed windows and locked doors, the trapped souls of more than a century continue their existence in a realm where time has no meaning and escape is impossible. They wait in their temporal prison, part of a collective consciousness that grows stronger with each passing day, always hungry for new souls to add to their number. The house remembers everything, just as Thomas Brent wrote on his bedroom wall before he disappeared. It remembers every person who has entered its domain, every moment of their lives, every thought and feeling and dream they ever had. And in remembering, it keeps them alive in a way that is both a blessing and a curse, preserved forever in a state between life and death, between past and future, between hope and despair. So what do you think lies behind the macabre disappearances at Brent House? Is it a supernatural predator that feeds on human souls, or something even more terrifying, a glimpse into the true nature of time and consciousness that reveals how fragile our understanding of reality really is? Have you ever experienced something that made you question the boundaries between past and present? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this journey into the temporal mysteries of New Orleans has captivated you, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to Bayou Nightmares for more explorations of the unexplained. Ring that notification bell so you never miss our latest descent into the shadows where history and mystery intertwine. Remember, the stories we share here at Bayou Nightmares are works of fiction, though they may be inspired by real events, legends, and folklore. Whether you believe in the supernatural or not, these tales remind us that the world is full of mysteries waiting to be explored, and that some doors, once opened, can never be closed again. Until next time, keep your eyes open and your mind ready for the impossible. The past is never truly gone, and sometimes, it reaches out to claim the present. Sweet dreams, and remember, in New Orleans, time itself can become a trap, and some houses never let their guests leave.